364 D1 basketball programs in the country, and only 68 of them make the NCAA tournament field. 31 of those teams receive automatic bids by winning their conference tournament, which means there's just 37 at-large bids up for grabs. Gonna welcome in Brad Wachtel, the lead bracketologist for Hoops HQ, to help me break this all down. And Brad, my question is this: help me break this down. Like, of the 37 at-large bids, how many of them do we know are already going to go to teams in the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, those high major conferences?
So right now there's about eight that are going to go to teams in those power conferences. And at the moment, we see about 32 locks that are for teams that are shored up a bid for the NCAA tournament. Now, the thing about that is, of those 32, as I just mentioned, the eight are going to be removed from that at-large category. So you have about 24 teams right now that are locks for at-large bids. And as you mentioned, there's 37 at-large bids, which means 13 spots are still open at the moment.
All right, so we've really got a race for 13. Let's start digging into this conference by conference. We're going to start in the SEC because I think that's appropriate. It's obviously been a historic year. The record is the Big East in 2011. They had 11 teams go into the field. People are talking about the SEC blowing that away and getting as many as 14, but it seems like the bottom of this league is like trailing off a little bit. What's a reasonable number to expect the SEC might get in this year's tournament?
So for me, I believe 11 or 12. Nine of those 14 teams are locks at the moment, and those five other teams, Oklahoma, Texas, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Georgia, are all hanging on the right side of the bubble or the wrong side of the bubble. And what they do over the course of the last 4 or 5 games of the season is going to determine whether or not they get into the field. And, there's some interesting teams in that conference with some crazy records in conference play, like Oklahoma, who's 3-10 in conference play. And, some might say, how could a team like that be in the NCAA tournament right now? Well, it's because of what they did in non-conference play. Oklahoma beat Louisville, they beat Arizona, and they beat Michigan, all on neutral courts. And those wins have aged so well over time that still puts them right in the mix.
Yeah, and this is why I love February basketball. Like March Madness is great, but February, the race for the bubble, I think is just as good. Let's go to the Big 12. Tell me who the locks are, who's on the bubble, and who's just out at this point.
Right. So in the Big 12, the locks are Houston, Iowa State, Arizona, Texas Tech, and Kansas. Bubble teams, there's still six, but I would say right now, three of them are in the field and four have plenty of work to do. Baylor, West Virginia, and BYU are in the field. I would say Baylor and West Virginia are looking good. And BYU has really improved their stock over the course of the last week or two. I have them up to a 10 seed at the moment. TCU is a team that's actually come out of nowhere over the last week or so. They've beaten Texas Tech. They won at Baylor. They beat BYU. Strength of record around 50 right now. So they still have work to do, but for me, they're getting close to that first four out category. And if they can put together, some wins over the next week or so, they could actually find themselves on the right side of the bubble.
All right, Jamie Dixon doing work. All right, take me to the Big Ten. Same question: who's in, who's on the bubble, and who don't I have to watch for the next 3 weeks?
Sure. So the eight teams are locks. We got Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, Illinois, Maryland, Oregon, and UCLA. Those teams will be in the NCAA tournament. On the bubble, you got Ohio State, Nebraska, Indiana, and USC, and you could even throw in Minnesota at the time. So any team that I haven't mentioned, Washington, Northwestern, Rutgers, and Penn State, you don't need to watch those teams. But in terms of on the bubble, the one team I want to point out is Ohio State. They lost. They got blown out last night against Northwestern at home, which is a problem because they're now 15-12 overall, currently right above my last four in, and they have to go out west to play at USC and UCLA. A team doesn't get into the NCAA tournament when they're just one game over 500. So Ohio State, while they have the strong wins, including a win at Purdue, they have a lot of work to do. They need to finish strong in order to get into the field.
And remember that game at UCLA coming up Sunday on CBS 3:45 East Coast time. Brad, you and I are both from the Northeast. It's been a bitter cold year, not just in terms of the weather, but in terms of the depth of basketball on the East Coast. I'm going to lump together the Big East and the ACC, and just very quickly, how many teams realistically do you see coming out of these two combined conferences?
Yeah, I would say 8 or 9 teams combined. So it just goes to show you how down these leagues are. In the Big East, St. John's, Marquette, Creighton, and UConn are going to be in with Xavier right there on the bubble. And in the ACC, you have Duke, Clemson, and Louisville. And then Wake Forest, SMU, and I'll still give North Carolina a shot for a chance to receive a bid.
All right, Brad, as always, I can't thank you enough for joining us. I've always loved your work dating back years and almost decades at this point. And we're going to look forward to seeing you again soon as the run for the March Madness continues. Don't go away. We've got one more segment coming up. And remember, you can always go over to 247sports.com for wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, and transfer portal updates.